Hello and welcome to another episode of Teppou Republic. On the last episode we defended Etchu against the Okazaki traitor forces who attacked the castle in strength. It was a bloody battle and we lost many men, but the castle is still in our hands at the end of it. However, the danger to Etchu did not go away. The Sendai Shogunal vanguard landed troops right next to the castle, so Takemichi's depleted force was in trouble. At the same time, the Yonago are continuing an invasion right into our heartlands, bypassing our defences. We attacked the Okazaki traitors' base in Mikawa with an overwhelming force, allowing us to easily capture it. They still have another province though in Noto, which is in a dangerous position. It's right north of Etchu, which itself is now in even more trouble because the Seido have landed more troops next to Etchu whilst the Sendai appear to be marauding southwards. Ignoring this situation for now, I turned to deal with the also equally bad situation in North Shinano, using General Tananao to engage the Edo forces, drawing as many of them as I could into a battle, where we eventually defeated them with superior line infantry, even though their melee advantage was quite well used by them. So now we need to see what we can do about the rest of their forces. Let's continue. Don't get me wrong, it's all most profitable. It's all about this supply and demand, you see. Everyone out in the sticks seems to think that coming to town for work is going to make them a fortune, or at least be more interesting than life on a farm. So many of them show up that there aren't even enough jobs for half of them to have them. So, the supply is high and the demand is low, demand for their labour that is, which means the cost of their labour must naturally be low, meaning we get our employees for cheap without having to lift a finger. The natural power of economics is something to be marvelled at, my friend. But it doesn't need to stop there. Lots of people means lots of housing is needed, and of course, the demand is high, but the supply is low. So housing can naturally be sold at a price far above the production cost. You can really see how the Westerners got so far with these kind of profits. With so much money rolling around these days, I think I might just have to get into the banking game too. The only way is up, my friend. Welcome back to Teppou Republic. These are the battle results from Tananao's battle against the Edo forces, which we saw at the end of the last episode. They're pretty damn good. He destroyed their entire force of over 2,000 for around 300 losses amongst his own troops. He also destroyed that little reinforcement group we saw there behind the enemy army. But of course, this only begs us to go on to fight another battle since we're in good shape, because there is another Edo army threatening to attack North Shinano. This time, the army is led by what must be their daimyo, or at least some very high-level general. You can see it's much higher level than either Tananao or Kodama combined, in fact. So I thought I'm going to take this opportunity to double-team him, using Kodama and Tananao's forces to attack from the front and the rear, also bringing up some artillery reinforcements, who are going to be quite useless. I needed Kodama to make the vanguard of the attack because then he can bring his mortars. Mortars can't be used as reinforcements. The enemy army is mostly melee focused with some power guns, and indeed it does have their daimyo leading it, but our army is much stronger on balance. It says here that our reinforcement army, our third one there, can't bring any of its units, which isn't true. It can actually bring in its wheeled artillery. I think the game was slightly glitchy there. So let's head down to the battlefield and see what we can do about this enemy army. Kodama's force sets up in the exact same formation I used to fight the Sunpu on this same battlefield not so long ago. Only this time, both sides have parrot guns and we've both positioned them in such a way that we can just about fire over the arc of the hill at each other. So right from the beginning, an artillery battle ensues, and I'm taking casualties, which I wasn't really expecting. I thought the enemy's artillery would have no line of sight from the beginning, and I'd be safe to just sit here. But I'm going to use my artillery to target the enemy's artillery and loosen up my formation to reduce casualties from incoming fire. Now the enemy are just rushing around inside the valley and probably trying to work out what to do as Tananao's forces come into the map from the south. They're on the other side of a hill themselves, so they also have no line of sight. They're in a slightly dangerous position. There are those wheeled artillery I mentioned, who are in fact coming onto the field, but they're going to be quite useless in this battle. So Tananao has to make a decision. He needs to try and either attack the enemy or lure them to attack him, whilst Kodama is going to move up to get closer to the hill and potentially come over it. The enemy didn't look like they were going to attack us. So first I'm going to get Tananao to take up a defensive position on top of this hill. Before we get there, I've sent my cavalry forwards. What I wanted to do was take advantage of the fact the enemy are still forming up and generally bubbling about with their forces over there to just rush in with my cav, take out their parrot guns so the threat to Kodama's forces can be neutralized. And this works pretty well. The enemy do see my cavalry coming in. They turn a few units to fire at them, but that fire is not accurate enough to prevent this devastating charge, annihilating the crew of their parrot guns. I'm not going to stick around because the enemy are going to start getting more and more guns on this position, firing shots into my cavalry ranks, so I need to get out of there. I lose a few men, but overall a perfectly healthy sacrifice for the defeat of an enemy parrot gun regiment. I've also drawn off a few spears who are now going to be kited for pretty much the entire battle. The rest of the enemy's army is doing what I feared they would do. They're charging towards Tananao's forces right up the hill, and because both sides were pretty much equidistant from the crest of the hill, we both arrive at the top at the same time, which gives a big advantage to the enemy because their units are melee orientated. I'm going to have almost no time to shoot the enemy. I get a single volley off and then charge what melee units I have to stop the enemy advance. Of course, my men are inferior both in quality and number and are simply going to be wiped out. These men are sacrifices through and through, but they are locking the enemy in place, which means I can use some of my missile advantage to kill the enemies whilst they kill my melee troops. Here I've got the enemy's general pinned down by spearmen, which is good news. Here's some bad news. Enemy spearmen charging these line infantry who aren't firing back because of the whole firing glitch thing in the Warscape engine. I'm going to send those line infantry in to lock those guys down in melee. There is a bit of line battling going on right on the flank here. I've even got these ninja sharpshooters who are firing at the units who the cavalry are drawing off, just slowly chipping away at them. In the centre, you can see I've got quite a few men firing on the big blobs of enemy troops in the middle. Behind my lines, some enemy spearmen are attacking my artillery, which of course are coming up the hill slower and haven't arrived yet. I've turned some sharpshooters and sent Tananao himself to fire at these men. The crew of the artillery aren't too bad in melee, so we're doing a good job of holding the enemy spearmen down whilst my gunners destroy them. I am going to take friendly fire, of course, but it's worth it. Speaking of friendly fire, you can see both sides have been completely destroyed in the left flank, and here in the middle the same thing is going to start happening. The good news is that the enemy have committed loads of troops to fight this one regiment of Yari attendants, which means that one unit sacrifice is going to effectively delete all of these enemy spear units from the battle, because my men are just constantly firing into them, destroying their numbers and morale, so that sacrifice was going particularly well. Here's some more enemy spearmen fighting with my own spearmen of higher quality. That part was going to go well. Also, on the right flank, my cavalry have finally got caught by one of the enemy units. I think I might have been distracted microing elsewhere on the battlefield and let them get caught. Kodama is now finally arriving, his men forming up, taking stock of the battlefield, fighting off some marginal enemy units that came to stop me. But now that Kodama's men can attack the enemy from the rear, things might go a bit better. This is the problem with making these young officers into generals. They don't know the value of waiting. Come on, everyone up, up! That sound you hear from over the hills is the sound of your brothers dying. We've waited all this time for relief, and now they're finally here. We can't just stroll up and help them like some ingrates. You've seen the ferocity of the Edo lads. They won't let our reinforcements through without a beating. You know, when we fought side by side with them to take this land, they tried to get me to defect, bring you boys to sit at the Shogun's knee like dogs. Don't make me regret my choice. With Kodama's arrival, things are going to go our way much easier, but to be honest, they were already going okay. Tananao has pretty much defeated all comers. You can see I've run out of melee infantry, so I'm now committing missile units to fight off the remaining enemy men. Only a few of them are remaining though, and of course their morale has been pretty much shattered by seeing the rest of their army be defeated. So these expeditionary forces should be enough to take out these remaining spear levies at the very least. We still do have some enemy range units to deal with. I've got some line battling going on both flanks, but of course these enemy units are now going to be fired at from the rear by Kodama's men coming down the hill, plus melee units are coming up to attack them directly. Overall, the enemy are in trouble, and as my melee units make contact with the enemy, they start a mass rout, and the battle comes to an end. So we did take pretty heavy casualties because of all the sacrifices I had to make in order to allow myself to win out with a missile advantage at very close range. This awkward situation with the hill didn't play to Tannenau's strengths, but it's gone okay. The most important units in his army, his elite missile infantry, are still alive, and we've only lost units who we can admittedly replace quite easily, such as Yari attendants. Let's head back to the strategy map and see the true damage in the battle results. Looks like we lost around 800 men, nearly 900. We defeated 1,800. Still an okay result, not as good as some of our recent results though. Tannenau's army lost only one full regiment, although the rest of his regiments are depleted, in some cases extremely depleted. I'm surprised more of them didn't disband after that battle. So now really Kodama's and Tannenau's armies are both not in a state to fight. So I'm going to basically turtle them up around North Shinano itself and just defend the area against the oncoming Sunpu forces who are currently on their way here marching along the road. So I've got the forces together and put them in a setup that will regenerate them as much as possible. So after 2 to 3 turns they should be back into a fit state to fight, but of course we don't know what's going to happen during those 2 to 3 turns. Now you'll remember in the last episode I was ignoring this really dangerous situation in Etchu, where a Sendai Shogunal vanguard army was marching south towards the undefended territory of Hida, and I kind of realised I had to do something about that. Letting them get in there would be an extremely painful situation, even if it does mean abandoning the castle to potentially be attacked by the Sado. You can see the Sendai have an almost all cavalry army, very weird. My plan is to defeat this army without taking too many losses and head back to the castle to defend if the Sado attack immediately afterwards. So this is another one of those battles where I need to focus on preserving my men because they might be fighting another battle almost immediately afterwards. I set up my formation on a nice hill. I've got sharpshooters at the back, looking out over the main line infantry formation in the middle, and in the front I've spread what few melee units I have out really thin across the whole front of the line. I really need to stop the enemy's massive cavalry advantage from being utilised. Because we've seen before, saber cavalry can rip through even anti-cavalry units. So if their 8 or so regiments of saber cavalry get at my main line infantry battalions, I'm in trouble. They'll basically annihilate them. So what I need to do is hold the enemy off as much as I can. I was delighted to see that the enemy infantry have formed up in the centre in a nice blobby columnar formation, which is perfect for attacking with artillery. First I give them a blast of shrapnel shot, which has extreme casualties. That's going to thin them out a bit, especially the guys nearer the front. And then of course all the time that they're marching towards me, and they are marching rather than running, they're going to be taking artillery fire, regular artillery fire from my Parrot guns. That artillery fire is super inaccurate, but because they are blobbed together like this, shots that miss might still get casualties in other regiments which the Parrot guns weren't actually targeting. So they're in trouble and they're not going to run to make up for it. So the enemy are just going to gradually advance towards me, not doing anything with their cavalry at the moment. They're actually leading with their infantry who are taking the brunt of the fire. As they come in, I've actually recharged another shrapnel shot, so I used more shrapnel to take down more of their men, and they're coming into range of my sharpshooters who are annihilating the leading unit of Spear Levy. I was surprised this unit of Spear Levy hasn't routed already. You can see it's lost almost all of its men. Spear Levy are the lowest morale unit in the game. I was very shocked to see they hadn't fallen back, but the enemy does have a rank 3 general, so it's possible the abilities of that general are keeping their men in the fight. So the enemy are going to set up to begin firing at my melee units in front. That's the problem with having the melee units in front, is it does mean the enemy's line infantry can't be attacked by my own line infantry because they can set up far enough away. But I wasn't too worried about that because my sharpshooters are still gunning down these line infantry. Plus I've got my artillery targeting their formations now, and that's going to do pretty heavy damage. They've got rifle attendants too who aren't very good at this long range. Overall, I'm not really worried about the infantry at all. These Spear Levy are going to be wiped out as they advance, going uphill very slowly. The cavalry are the main threat, and here they come. At first I thought they were going to go around my left flank and attack me in the rear. I realised they weren't, so I pulled back the Yarikachi I was going to defend over there with. I need these Yarikachi to just lock these enemy cavalry in position. Luckily I was successfully able to do that. In the middle, I'm doing the same thing with Katanakachi, and if you're watching in HD, you can see the numbers on these Katanakachi just drop. The Saber cavalry are absolutely destroying them, wiping them out in just a few seconds. Almost all of the Katanakachi are dead. They're also taking extreme friendly fire, as all of the regiments behind them are trying to hit the enemy cavalry and hitting the Katanakachi in the meantime. Some of the enemy's cavalry did make it up to my line infantry, but they were gunned down quite swiftly. So overall, the main line has not been violated by the enemy's cavalry, so that part of the plan has worked. I've also caught up some enemy cav with my own cav there on the right flank. Got some Yari attendants holding the enemy cav here. They're being slaughtered by friendly fire and by the enemy's high quality cavalry. But as we saw in the last battle, the sacrifice of Yari attendants is usually worth it. Here are the Katanakachi who survived that battle. That regiment was at full strength before that fight. It was almost completely wiped out in that engagement which lasted no more than 30 seconds. Extreme casualty rate for those samurai. Anyway, the enemy were successfully defeated as the outcome of that very quick battle there at the end. They still had 4 regiments of wooden cannons to worry about, so I had to send my remaining cavalry to go and wipe them out, which of course isn't a lossless process. I did take casualties advancing on the cannons, but overall it was nothing to worry about, especially compared to the casualties amongst my melee units that I just took. So all 4 of the enemy wooden cannon regiments are going to rout as my cavalry start marauding through their ranks. Overall, we've successfully wiped out this enemy cavalry heavy army, but we've lost all of our melee troops in the process. Whether or not this will be a big problem kind of depends on what the Sado forces are going to bring into the impending battle, so we'll have to see about that in the meantime. At least we protected our line infantry in the same way that Tananao has. We've kept our most valuable units alive, and we'll see whether that turns out to be something extremely useful once the next battle starts. As I say, let's head back to the campaign map. It's an old samurai idea, a tenet of Bushido. It says something like, when given the choice between life and death, choose death. There are countless similar teachings, designed to breed warriors of the people. In times like this, I can only hope that in those last moments my men held such beliefs and were able to feel rightly proud of their sacrifice. I hate that kind of thing though. I hate having to rely on it. Don't tell anyone I said that. I have enough people accusing me of being battle shy, and this will only give them ammunition. It isn't battle that scares me, it's losing the trust of these men through poor leadership. The battle results are okay. We lost a couple of hundred men, almost all of them in these leading regiments of melee infantry here. Those samurai have taken extreme damage. Luckily, no regiments actually disbanded. I noticed that the enemy only killed something like 150 troops, yet we'd lost over 200, so I'm guessing lots of friendly fire was to blame for at least, well, perhaps a third of the losses amongst my own men. I also noted here that the power guns got the majority of the kills amongst the enemy regiments. Actually more than I thought they did, and it really shows the power of those power guns, especially against a slowly advancing, not particularly well formed up formation. Now, as a result of the victory, Takemichi levels up, which is always good news, and now I still have enough movement points to get back to Etchu, which is what I had hoped. So if the Sado army does attack in the next turn, I can still make sure the castle is properly defended with an army which is still at relatively full strength. The melee units aren't going to be much help anymore, but all those missile units defending the walls will still do a good job. I also captured 3 units of wooden cannons, not really very useful for now, but they are useful to have as a garrison once I've left, so I can leave the wooden cannons behind to control public order once the main force is out of here. I also had this random unit of Naginata Levy hanging around outside the castle. I can't really remember why they were there, but I'm going to put them inside the castle so they'll start regenerating. So I've got this weird reinforcement army of wooden cannons and cavalry, and Takemichi's main force stationed inside the castle, ready to face off against any attacks. Now, I had Takayuki sitting here in Setsu, trying to defend against an attack from Harima, which I assumed was going to come. I'd set up an ambush, waiting for the enemy to come, but they never did. So I decided to advance. Seeing that the enemy only had a few men in front of their castle, I attacked, but of course they had a full stack just out of view that I now discover. I decided not to go into a battle against them, even though I could have won. Because I thought I'd rather fight on my own terms. They'll probably attack me now. It seems like they're probably marching in this direction. So I'll receive them in a defensive engagement and fight off this army of the Takasuki, my old allies. In Tamba province, I have this full stack which I could potentially go on the offensive with, but I want to keep it here because Tamba is on the crossroads of many enemy regions and I was expecting it to be attacked. I guess the attack I was expecting to go into Tamba is currently in Wakasa, moving through Wakasa into, well, perhaps Ejizen, perhaps Umi. Both options are quite dangerous. I've got some gunboats to take out some of the enemy's reservists, not going to have a big difference. I really need Takehisa's army here to move up and engage with these two stacks and somehow beat them both in one big battle. But for now we're not going to be focusing on that because we've got other foes to fight. The Satsuma are making their first major move against me. They've sent this large fleet to attack my own fleet, which is currently raiding some of the Imperial trade routes just off the coast of Kochi. The enemy fleet has highly experienced ships, some of them are copper plated, but they're also mostly corvettes of a slightly lesser class than my own corvettes. So the balance bar is slightly in my favour, plus I have an ironclad, and if the enemy doesn't have any armour piercing shells, which they may not, that ironclad is effectively invincible. So let's head down to the seas near Kochi and see if we can wipe out this fleet. Here is my ironclad on the seas of Kochi, led by Captain Compton, and here are the rest of the ships. I formed up in a giant horizontal line, not the most creative formation, but in this case perhaps what is needed. I've put some slight echelons on the edge, directing my guns inward at the enemy advance. All of my guns are ready to fire, but the enemy are going to take a while to get here. If we scroll for ages across the map, we'll eventually find them. It's very misty, which is inconvenient actually, but I realise it's going to play to my advantage because I'm going to be using short-range explosive shots in this battle, whereas the mist will obscure the enemy's long-range arm-piercing shots if they do try and use them. They're leading with a frigate, one of the big gunned things that the Kanazawa put against us recently. A powerful unit, but it's going to take the brunt of our fire since it's coming in first, so perhaps we can take it out quickly. So now the enemy are a bit closer. They've split their line advance up into a couple of lines, so splitting into two lines as they got closer. I'm guessing these boats had different individual targets, but then they started merging them again as they got even closer, and I guess it doesn't really work to their advantage because these ships are sailing straight forward through my zone of fire. They don't really have many guns who can fire at me. It's because all of their ships are targeting the ironclad, which is actually ideal because I think they're only using standard shots. So those standard shots are going to be bouncing off the ironclad right in the corner of my formation, and in the meantime all of my regular ships are firing explosive shots right at the enemy. You can see the enemy frigate here caught fire for a second, then instantly went out in a weird twist. We've destroyed their front mast, we've destroyed the middle mast as well now. It's taking severe explosive fire. More permanent fires are starting on the ship. The crew quite sensibly decide to abandon it as the entire ship begins to be caught up by the flames. So we've now taken out their most powerful ship right away. The next ship coming in is suffering a pretty similar fate. You can probably see a pattern beginning to emerge because the enemy are coming in a line. As long as I can keep defeating the unit at the front of the line before the unit behind it gets into position, this battle is effectively going to keep being a 10-on-1 fight rather than a proper fleet battle. And of course each 10-on-1 engagement is in my favour, so I'm probably going to win. So all these enemy ships are just kind of turning in to engage with us, but taking so much fire that they spend half the time trying to repair the fire damage and surrender quite quickly. Their morale isn't going to be too high. You can see that frigate has now been completely caught up by the flames and is just going to burn for the entire battle. The enemy does have some ships which have pretty high morale, who perhaps will tolerate being under extreme explosive fire, but the ones that don't are surrendering quite quickly. They do have a number of lesser ships who are going to surrender almost immediately upon taking fire. These bigger ships, which they're leading with, take a few shots to go down, but once they're severely on fire, lost all their masts and have lost a number of their crewmen due to the shrapnel which comes off the explosive shots, they decide to surrender. So this battle is going to continue much in this fashion for the entire time. I just have to work my way through every single enemy ship, gradually getting them all to surrender and abandon their posts. Didn't you hear it? Yesterday morning when the fog was down, it was like it was thundering out at sea. Banging and booming it was all morning. Weren't no thunder though, it was them Sioux ships practicing their shooting again. I thought there must be a battle at first, but then this morning their supply runners came by and ordered everything same as usual. Thing is, you see, just now I was down on the beach and there was all kinds of drift coming up with the tide. Whatever they were doing, they must have sunk an old ship or two along the way. Makes practice more real, I guess. Stranger things happen at sea. So now we're a little bit later, a few more ships have gone through the grinder. You can see their burning carcasses and now providing cover for the following enemy ships who still aren't going to do very well. Looks like they're actually getting through the dead body field, but once they get through they're then exposed to our fire once again and are quickly going to be annihilated by these explosive shots, especially because now they're closer. The extreme inaccuracy of explosive shots is going to be slightly counterbalanced by the lack of fog obscuring the vision of the gunners on the ships, who are now actually pretty close to their targets. And at the same time, the enemy still aren't really trying to fire back at anything apart from my ironclad right on the end of the line. So all of these wooden ships that they could be firing at close range and potentially doing damage to aren't taking damage at all, whereas their wooden ships, even the copper-plated ones, are going to be annihilated very quickly by this close range explosive fire. So that's those two ships there advancing, taken out. They still have a couple more ships behind all of these ship carcasses, but obviously they're going to meet the same fate. You can see the seas are littered with the burning enemy ships. It can't be good for the morale on the few remaining craft. One of them's already running away. They do have very high level crews though, and their morale is high enough to simply keep charging in just because that's their orders. They're going to charge through the deadly rain of fire that we're providing and simply be destroyed. Here's the final ship. All of my ships are firing simultaneously on this one enemy boat. It's been completely annihilated. The crew sensibly get out of there before the entire ship explodes, and that's the last of their ships dealt with. The enemy fleet has been completely wiped out for no losses on our side. We lost a couple of crew when some of their standard shots hit men on the decks of our ships, but for the most part we haven't lost anything at all. Our ships are all in good condition. I think we lost 2 guns on the ironclad because it was taking a lot of fire. One of its gun turrets was hit quite a lot. Overall the enemy fleet was destroyed for no losses whatsoever. Superb. It's going to be a long time before they can build that expensive fleet again and get it back to us. The Satsuma have really been dealt a nice defeat here. And the Sioux Navy is going to level up tons as a result. All of their units are now going to have much more experience because we've wiped out an enemy fleet. Moving on, the Nagoka are making moves on North Shinano yet again, and then interestingly the Yonago move a fleet to attack my fleet near Kochi as well. This time their ships are a little bit better, but not copper plated as some of the Satsuma ones were, so they've basically got a more offensively orientated fleet. But of course it's going to be very tempting for me to just do the exact same tactic, and if the enemy AI decides to do the same sort of columnar advance, I can do the same thing and simply annihilate their fleet without taking any losses at all, which of course would be absolutely ideal. The loss of this fleet would be devastating. We'll see what I do next time. So that's all for this episode. There'll be plenty more giant battles with enemy invading forces next time on Teppou Republic.